All right, so let's talk a little bit today about program design. So this is kind of the follow-up video to our most recent Beauty and the Beast, strength and conditioning, and physical therapy podcast. So asked by a specific client, what goes into creating a program? How can I create a program myself? And we talked a lot about that, so take a look at episode 14. But to see in a little bit real time, we're going to go through a couple different, pretty basic, simplified strategies that you can use to create your own programming outside of the gym. Or if you're somebody out there who doesn't train with us and wants to create something on your own. So I'm going to go through it in two different ways. Okay, the first one I'm going to go through is going to be a little bit more of an athlete type model, something where you're trying to emphasize power development, strength development, speed, that kind of thing. So something that I would program more for an athlete. Specifically more a field or court sport athlete, somebody who has the time to dedicate to their training to get the best performance outcomes. Then after that, I'll go through a secondary one, which is going to be a little bit more simplified or a little bit shorter time period training, where you can get a little bit of bang for the buck. You're not going to increase quite as much in any one particular scenario, so you're not going to get quite as big of power gains or strength gains doing it the second way. But if you're somebody that does something more in like the obstacle course racing world, or just somebody who's trying to do some more general health and fitness, increase their metabolic fitness, all that kind of stuff, it's going to be a really good way to go. All right, so let's go through again that first one. So this one's going to be a little bit more in depth, but you'll see that the principles are fairly similar from one to the next. All right, I'm just going to alternate back and forth between blue and red so that it's easier to see when I go from one section to the next. So either one, whether or not no matter which one, it starts off with the same thing. So we're going to start off with our soft tissue / flexibility. So this is our prep work. All right, this is our foam rolling, our static stretching. I realize that my handwriting is terrible, but I'm doing the best I can. Foam rolling, your static stretching, your mobility work. Somewhat. So don't worry about getting too deep in the mobility stuff, and when we get through here, I'm going to show you why. So foam rolling and static stretching are your big two. All right? Try to work around what you're going to be doing, as well as just stuff that you know you genuinely or generally have a problem with, or not have a problem with, but struggle with in terms of tension, tightness, all that sort of stuff. So foam rolling and static stretching, the biggest ones are going to be your quads, your glutes, all kinds of different upper body ones. There's all kinds of different stuff in there. So without making this a 20-minute video, let's just stay right with kind of what's in there. All right, following that, this is where we get into our kind of neuromuscular warm-up. And this can take many different shapes. All right, this is where I'll work on a lot of more joint stability type stuff. This is where I'll do like Turkish get-ups or kettlebell arm bars, or other things that are a little bit more, in tune based on, a specific pattern. Baseball players may work on some dynamic stabilization through their rotator cuff, through their shoulder. We may work Palloff presses if you're trying to work on some lateral hip strength, all that kind of stuff. So that's the next part, the neuro warm-up. From there, depending on our athlete, but let's pretend that, we're an athlete that's doing rotational work as well as all kinds of other stuff. We start working into what I term and what CFSC and Mike Bullen and stuff, light implement power. These are things like med ball throws, lighter kettlebell swings. I also tend to put locomotion in here. So your box jumps, your sprints, your lateral jumps, stuff that you're not expressing power over something that's super heavy, but you're trying to, throw something as fast as you can, jump as fast as you can, that kind of thing. So from there, next part, with theoretically, and this is the one that I'll often leave out if you have people that are a little bit newer until you build up the patterns, would be your heavy implement power. So this is where you're expressing power on something that's a little bit heavier, as it says. Okay, so this is things like cleans, whether they be power cleans, hang cleans, full cleans, snatches, dumbbell snatches, any of that stuff where you are trying to express power on something that's heavier, something that you're going to be doing less reps of, but is going to be developing maximal explosive force. The one thing to remember about both of these in an athlete-driven sort of programming is the volume of these is not going to be super high. I'm looking for, in my cleans and things like that, maybe 3 to 5 reps per set. Okay, so that way you're developing maximal power or close to maximal force or power. All right, same thing with the light implement power. Something light that you're moving for 3 to 5 reps aside. And light is the key word on these. If you're trying to med ball throw, a med ball that's 30 pounds, then you're working more on the strength side of things and you're not actually going to get the explosive power. Because remember, the point of what I'm going through right now is performance-based. It's trying to build power to the fullest and build strength to the fullest based on your more athletic population who are more concerned with building specifically power and strength, not kind of working those into an already formed program. All right, so that's important to keep in mind. And when I say 3 to 5 reps, I mean for 3-4 sets. Same thing up here. So once we get through there, then we start getting into the meat of the programming. And the way that coaches do this differently, the way that I tend to do it is in trisets. Either supersets or trisets, meaning 3 exercises in a row. Trisets. Okay, and those trisets consist of an upper body, a lower body, and some sort of mobility-based exercise. And this is the reason that I said what I did about the mobility up at the top. Don't worry too much about it at the beginning. You have to get some mobility, but that's where the foam rolling, the static stretching, all that sort of stuff, and then the neuromuscular warm-up comes into the equation. Is kind of turning everything on, getting everything to the greatest range of motion that you can. Then getting more into it, because we still need more mobility work than we've gotten in the beginning, we start getting into the trisets. So for me, at least. So trisets might look something like this. Let's say that my first one is going to be my big one is going to be my hip dominant. So today I'm doing trap bar deadlifts and I'm trying to go heavy. So trap bar deadlifts. And then I'll follow it up usually with an upper body related exercise that is not going to overstress muscles that I just worked on the trap bar deadlift. So something like an overhead press, so a dumbbell overhead press. Okay? The reason that I'll go with a press backed up with trap bar, and this is getting a little bit into the weeds, and we'll talk about it a little bit more when I get into the other version, is because these are relatively opposing movements, okay? Trap bar deadlifts, obviously, upper body, lower body. That's the obvious part. But trap bar deadlifts, or any sort of deadlift for that matter, require much more lat engagement because it's more of a lower body pull. So if you heard us talking about it, it's more of a lower body pull, where this is an upper body push. So, for example, I wouldn't necessarily, in order to get the most out of it, want to go trap bar deadlifts and then a chin up, because then the lats are being used back to back in high strength, high tension, high fatiguing exercises. So those two exercises are going to take away from each other. If I have a chin up after this, then when I get back to the deadlifts, it's going to take away from my ability to sustain my tension in order to keep, good posture and everything through my deadlift and maintain strength, and vice versa. Then if I finish my deadlifts and then I have to go directly to chin-ups, I'm not going to have as much ability to get full range of motion on my chin-ups because I'm already going to be pre-fatiguing the lats a little bit by doing those deadlifts in a certain way. And then I usually finish it off with some sort of mobility work. For this one, I usually, for this specific one, tend to go with a wall slide. So that's just forearms against the wall, deep breath in, exhaling, working on getting full shoulder blade range of motion, all that sort of stuff. So it's just a shoulder mobility exercise, but it also works as a rest at the bottom of my set. So the important thing to remember, so my trap bar deadlifts, I may actually go, 3 to 5 minutes between sets, right? So if I do one set, then I have to do my overhead presses, then I have to do my wall slides, and then maybe, I grab some water or whatever thing before I come back to trap bar deadlifts. So the rest is built in, even though I'm not actually stopping. It's much more efficient, you're getting more done, but you're not having to just stop and rest at any point. So then, I've done my first tricep. My second tricep is usually some form of, something that I didn't do here. So my second one might be a quad dominant, so let's just say goblet squats. And then again, so reverse of what I just showed, right? We showed trap bar deadlifts, which is a lower body pull that involves lats and stuff like that. So I paired it with a push, which is an opposing movement, so they're less likely to take away from each other. Now I go into that chin up, for example, or lat pull down, or a row, or I'll go into a little more detail about how you can change up those specific things. But chin up, because again, goblet squat is a lower body push. You're driving up. You may be holding a weight in that your shoulders are engaged in that way, but you're not actively engaging the lats so much that it's going to take away from your chin-ups. And then same thing, and usually on this one, I'll usually go some sort of lower. This is where I'll do, like a dead bug. Sometimes leg lowering variations. Sometimes just some straight up stretching, any of that kind of stuff. And then usually on the last one, I try to do something that involves some sort of stabilization or some sort of side to side. And now, 2 trisets is probably plenty, if I'm being honest, because you've got 6 exercises, you do 3 or 4 sets of these, you're gonna hit a ton of these. If you wanted to add another one, or let's say that you can only find the time to do this 2 days a week, and you have to find the time to do some lateral stuff, then that's where that third one comes in. So something like a lateral lunge of some kind. And then I usually will follow that with some sort of upper body. Usually it's something that I haven't already hit here. Let's see, lateral lunge and, I take that back. Usually here is my core variation of some kind. So this is usually where I do my farmer's holds, / walks, / whatever. And then finish it up with something that's a little less like a sideline windmill. All right, so again, lateral variation followed by a farmer's hold, walk, whatever, followed by a sideline windmill. So if you look here, I've hit my foam rolling, my stretching, a little bit of mobility. Then my neuromuscular, I've worked on the stability of the joints in response to dynamic tension, all kinds of different stuff. Then I work into my light implement power. That's my med ball throws, that's my sprints, it could be skips, other locomotion drills, even things like ladders, especially for your older population, power for them can just be ladders. Then move into heavy implement power. Heavy implement power, that's the one that can probably be most easily taken away if you have somebody that's a little bit newer or you just are not experienced with your cleans and that sort of thing. But you also can use things like kettlebell swings in here. I put kettlebell swings up here, but that's why I labeled them light. Heavier kettlebell swings, things along those lines. If you're beginners that power for them may be a light kettlebell swing, like heavy implement power, can go here. Then you get into the meat of it, your deadlifts, your overhead presses, your recovery. There are a lot of different schools of thoughts. There are a lot of people that will do these in supersets, which just means you'd be doing 2 exercises back to back. So let's pretend that you went like trap bar deadlifts and dumbbell overhead presses. You went back and forth between those 2. And then you went goblet squats and chin-ups, and you went back and forth between those 2. And then you went lateral lunge and farmer's walks. You went back and forth between those 2. You can do it that way. If you have more time, you can go like trap bar deadlifts and wall slides. You can go goblet squats and dead bug, and then you could go, lateral lunge and chin up, because that wouldn't stress out those. And then you could go like sideline windmills and dumbbell overhead presses. There's so many different ways you can do it, but this is a very basic way of setting up how you can set up a training. All right, now of course I forgot an eraser, so I'll be back in 5 seconds, hopefully. All right, now let's pretend that you just don't have all the information in the world, and I just threw a bunch of stuff at you and you're like, what the hell, that was way more than I was looking for. I just need something simple to work through to get pieces of all of those in. Or you don't have an hour and a half to train every day. So now let's go through what a little bit more simplified version, kind of a circuit sort of workout would look like based on these same principles. So again, I'm not even going to erase this because it starts in the same place. Your foam rolling, your static stretching, all the things that reset your tissue, reset you back to what is a more neutral positioning so that you can train a little bit more. You start off a little bit more relaxed. You turn down the muscle tension before you crank it back up again with exercise, okay? So we start there. Now, the optional part in the middle, if you have any sort of time to do movement-based stuff. So this is kind of like a mishmash, whatever. Yeah, you know the word I'm looking for, that it's not coming to me, of the things that I just talked about. So this could be your sprints. This could be your skips or other movement drills. This could be your power. This could be stabilization. I usually prefer to stay away from the power part just because if you're not doing quite as much before, you're not really as warmed up, and you can run into issues there. But so more movement-based stuff if you're able to. Okay, ideally this is where you're going to add a little bit more mobility into the warm-up or in here, because you're not going to get it as much throughout the workout like you do in the other variation that I just showed. So once we go through there, then we start, let's just say that we want a 5 exercise circuit, something you can go right from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. This is going to create a much more metabolic training effect than what I showed before, okay? Over the course of that entire other workout, you're going to be challenged, you're going to be tired, and it's going to take, the energy out of you, but it's not going to create as much of a specifically metabolic effect. Or I keep saying metabolic, that's what I call essentially what you might think of as cardio, okay? This, however, if done right, will increase that. But remember, like I said, you're going to increase the metabolic effect, but when you increase metabolic effect by increasing volume, it also decreases power development. You're just not going to be able to throw things as fast, move as fast, or pick up as heavy because there is less rest put in there. There's less emphasis on all explosive movement and more on getting explosive movement, but also kind of the metabolic piece of moving from exercise to exercise. So how do we design something a little bit more simple like that? So again, let's say we want a 5 exercise circuit. Okay, the principles, the way that I kind of talked about them still apply here, all right? So let's say, usually I start with my heavier lift. So let's pretend that I want to do it very similarly to the last one I said. So let's start with trap bar deadlifts. Or any type of deadlift variation, okay? I would then I'm just going to keep switching markers so it's easier to see as I write. I would then go from trap bar deadlifts into, again, remember I talked about in the last one how I wouldn't necessarily want to go to something that's a row, a pull, because I just used those pull muscles in order to stabilize for those trap bar deadlifts. So after that, I'd want to go with something like a push variation. Push up, bench press, whether it's with a barbell, a dumbbell, whatever you're able to do. An overhead press, whatever. Some sort of pressing upper body variation. And then we come back around to my lower body quad dominant. So this was our hip dominant, this was our upper body push, and then we got our quad dominant. Let's just keep using goblet squats because that's what we just used in the last one, okay? And then, similar to what I talked about last time, that's where we can add in that pull. Chins, rows, whatever. And then finish it off with some sort of core variation. On a day that I have trap bar deadlifts or some sort of deadlift, something that affects such the grips, if I were to do trap bar deadlifts and chins on the same day, then I'd probably want to stay away from things like farmer's carries that's going to, where your grip is going to end up being the limiting factor. You're not going to be able to carry as much because your grip is so toast from doing deadlifts and chins. So on a day like today where trap bar deadlifts, and you got to remember too, I'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this would cycle right back around to trap bar deadlifts. So let's say, I wanted to do something like bear crawls. All right, so again, now I'm not stressing the muscles that are going to be used or in the same capacity in trap bar deadlifts, right? But I'm continually moving. So I still will get a couple minutes of rest. I mean, depending on how fast you are, how many reps you're doing, so on and so forth. There's going to be anywhere from 3 to 7 minutes between when I do trap bar deadlifts the first time and when I do it the second time. And it's the same thing for the push-ups, and the same thing for the goblet squats, and the same thing for the chins, right? The first time and the second time. The same thing with the bear crawls, okay? So I'm getting rest from that specific pattern by going through other exercises in between. Again, much more metabolic training effect, and this will almost always be quicker depending on how hard you're pushing yourself or how much you're trying to lift, that kind of thing. So now how can we manipulate? This is a fairly easy way to start, right? How can we manipulate this to make sure that we hit all our different important variables, okay? So let's just worry about the circuit because a lot of this other stuff is pretty straightforward, or can be. Realistically, this video could probably be about 4 hours long if I really went into depth with every single one. So what is important? What are important factors to look at? So with the 5 exercise circuit, depending on what you're looking for, it's your volume first, okay? On a given day or over a given week, it's your volume, it's your movement pattern. All right, and by movement pattern, I mean what directions you're going. I should say planes of movement would be a better way to put that. Okay, and then things like what version of a press are you doing? So a push-up or a bench press is a horizontal press. It's pressing horizontally. Whereas an overhead press is a vertical press. It's pressing vertically. So that's 2 different variations right there. Then you start talking about, unilateral versus bilateral. Wow, lateral. There we go. There's so many different things you can adjust. So how can we then build out a program that hits all these things at once? Okay, so let's say that I'm taking this perfect. It's only a matter of time to let it happen. I'm not restarting the video because it's already long. All right, so let's say that my goal is pretty much all-out conditioning, okay? I'm not as worried about building power. I'm not as worried about, speed or strength necessarily. My goal is to build as much metabolic or cardio conditioning as possible. My volume is going to be higher, okay? My weights going to be lower, okay? So that I can move from exercise to exercise. But like everything else, there's a point. If I try to go so light on the weights, that it doesn't actually challenge my metabolic system, then you kind of defeat the purpose, okay? So volume increases, weights are gonna decrease. And by volume, I mean, so let's say that you wanted to do this circuit 7 times, 10 reps per exercise per round, if you want to call it that, round, time through, whatever. All right, so that is going to be a high volume. Okay, you're going to end up doing about 70 reps of every single exercise. But that means your weights are going to go down. And if you don't think they're going to go down, try it because they're going to go down. Or you're going to try and go too heavy and you're going to run into trouble. So weights are going to have to decrease a little bit. Now let's say that your goal is to get some of that metabolic effect, but you also want to increase your power, your strength. It's the opposite. Your volume is going to go down, your weights are going to go up. Okay? It doesn't have to be crazy. I'm not talking like, if you were really looking for all-out strength and power, then yes, maybe you do only 1 to 3 rounds through, 3 to 6 reps per exercise. Okay, so a total of however many it is, I'm not doing the math right now. And your weights are going to be higher. You're going to be able to do it higher because the volume is less. You're not taxing your body metabolically as much. You're more able to recover and all that kind of good stuff. All right, so that's one way that you can manipulate it to up either the power or the strength or the metabolic conditioning portion, depending on what you're looking for. Now, how do we then build this over the course of maybe 3 to 4 training sessions so that we're hitting the different planes of movement? So this is where the next piece comes into it. So let's say we started here, right? This was our Monday. So then our next day, maybe something along the lines of, just to keep it simple, I'm going to keep the same order: hip dominant, press, quad dominant, pull, and some sort of core variation. My next day might be single leg deadlifts. Again, so manipulating that bilateral versus unilateral version of that first exercise, followed by what I do. Let's just pretend I picked bench press over here just for the sake of the next one. So let's say this is a dumbbell overhead press. Again, so now I'm also working that variance. I'm doing a horizontal push. I'm now doing a vertical push, a different plane of movement. Instead of goblet squats, I'm doing something like a split squat. All right, so that's 1 foot forward, 1 foot back. It's just an in-place lunge. Then let's just say I picked chins just for the purpose of moving on. So chins, overhead or a vertical pull. Now I'm going a horizontal pull. Some sort of row variation. Inverted rows, TRX rows, dumbbell bench rows, seal rows, whatever. And then what's nice about this is, so now that I don't have quite as much grip demands, now my core variation finishes off with those farmer carries. And again, now I take this and I can work with the volume, right? I can either increase the volume to get a more metabolic demand. I'm walking further, I'm doing more reps of the other few, or I decrease the volume, so decrease the amount of times I go through the circuit or the amount of reps per exercise, and my weights will go up. So that is where you can kind of, if you're noticing that you are not gaining strength, decrease your volume a little bit. If you're noticing that when you're going out and trying to do things that are, you need to have that cardiovascular endurance, then up your volume a little bit. Okay, so we've hit front to back, up and down. How do we then get our other planes of movement in there? Our rotational, all that sort of stuff, our lateral, our side to side, our frontal plane stuff, our transverse plane stuff, all that kind of good stuff. So I'm just going to erase this because you guys all have it on video now. So now how do I get that? I do the same exact thing that I've been doing, okay? So that first one, trap bar deadlifts. Let's say that, so is this a perfect parallel for a hip dominant? No, but let's just say that I'm doing a lateral lunge here instead. Okay, so now I've moved front to back, and now I'm doing side to side. Is it a perfect one with a trap bar deadlift? No, but for the sake of the argument, or the sake of this conversation, we can use that there. So then, push. How can we transfer that into something that's rotational now? Well, your push becomes your med ball throws. Your scoop tosses, your shot puts, even if you don't have a place where you can do med balls, but you have a place that has a cable, and you can mimic those same motions. All right, so those are how you get your pushes in, but you're also working in that rotational plane of movement. All right, so now we've got our quad dominant, and we kind of already did with lateral lunge, so let's just go with something totally different. Let's go with something like a step up. What's nice about both of these variations is they are kind of a mix isn't quite right, because step up is still relatively quad dominant, but these are much more, if you were to look at a scale of hip dominant here and quad dominant here, something like a barbell Romanian deadlift would be way over here, whereas something like a let's see, back squat's probably not a good, let's say front squat. Front squat would be way over here, or right around here. Whereas lateral lunges and step-ups are super duper 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 glute based. Okay, so these two exercises sit more kind of in this area here. All right, so even though you're not technically doing a strictly quad dominant and a strictly hip dominant, they're both going to hit a little bit of all of that. All right, room. All right, so step ups. So now we've got our pull variation, and that can be any other different variation we haven't done. You can also do things like other versions of med ball throws. So a shot put, for example, where you're pushing the ball, is going to be much more of a push, whereas a scoop toss, okay, where I'm scooping up and under, is going to be more of a transverse pull movement. All right? And I'll show you another way that we can do this in a second as well. That is a little bit more, core based. And then my core can be whatever I want it to be realistically, or it can be an additional conditioning exercise. You can do sled pushes, you can do some whatever. I don't tend to worry about that as much. We've got our core, we've got our carry. I suppose you can do planks if, most of the exercises that you're doing here, you're nailing your core anyway, so you can add in, I tend to add in something more metabolic on these days, like a bike sprint, a skier sprint, etc. Because these ones here are not going to be as metabolically taxing because the weight's lower, it's more, on movement and explosiveness compared to here. You doing these 4 exercises is going to be a lot more taxing than you doing these 4 exercises, which is why I'll often add some sort of metabolic component or sprint component into when I'm doing something that's a little less intense from that perspective. All right, but let's say that we're trying to also get our cross connections in there, okay? So how else can we do that? We've got our lateral lunge, we've got our step ups. I'm not going to mess with those. I'm just going to swap out our med ball throws. Zeros too. All right. So we want to pull. What's a pull motion that involves a cross connection and is something that is slightly core based too? Those are our chops. Okay? Cable chops, band chops, whatever variation. Whereas raise, basically just a reverse chop, but it's a press. It's moving that cross connection pattern coming up and away from the body. Once you get to learn these, they can become incredibly metabolic when you start doing dynamic versions of chops and raises. All right, so those are some of the ways that you can, what I would suggest is that if you're going to start with this variation, this programming setup, start with somewhere like 3 to 4 reps. If you're somebody that's already pretty metabolically based, you have pretty good cardiovascular fitness, you're trying to keep that, but also increase your strength and power. Increase the weights, decrease the reps a little bit, but maybe keep the amount of rounds the same. So maybe go for 5 rounds, or 5 to 7 rounds, just, depending on your fitness level. But do weights that are somewhere in the 4 to 6 range. And when I say 4 to 6 range, what that means is if I hit 6 and I feel like I could get a 7th, increase the weight, okay? A lot of times what I tend to say is if you hit 4 to 5 and you're pretty much like done, then you're good. You found the right weight until you can hit that 6th or 7th, and then you go up again, okay? Whereas if you're the opposite and you're somebody that's really trying to work on their cardiovascular fitness, but you're pretty strong, you've been doing power stuff, you've been doing strength stuff, then maybe what you want to do to start is you're probably not going to have the best metabolic fitness in the world, just because that's not your game. So you might want to start with 3 to 4 rounds at 8 to 10 reps, okay? Work on that muscular endurance first, so how your endurance is from exercise to exercise. And then, once you notice that you're able to handle that, then you can up the overall volume, however many rounds you're doing. All right, so that is a very, very brief dive into how you can create your own program. Some of the things that go into programming here. If you guys have questions, please comment below on the video. Until next time, listen into our podcast, but go try them out.